Welcome to Cow Talks. I'm Chris Prevatt,
Beef Cattle and Forage Commodity Director for the Alabama Farmers Federation.
And I am Marcelo Wallau, Forage Extension Specialist with the University of Florida.
And this is our podcast, where we dive deep into the main topics affecting livestock and forage production in the southeastern United States.
From the mainstream media to new technologies straight from our research stations.
From cattle prices to international trade.
From our pastures and beyond.
Join us on this journey as we tackle the main issues affecting our producers and the sustainability of our production systems.
Hello and welcome to Cow Talks. Today I have the pleasure of having two colleagues and friends in the show with me. Henry Jordan, Variety Trial Coordinator for Auburn University, and Cheryl Mackowiak, my colleague at the North Florida Research and Education Center. Welcome.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
So Henry, every year we have those big variety trials. Last year we had a great podcast with Leanne and you talking about some of the results. We do this every year. We continue doing those variety trials, testing many cool season forages all across the Southeast in partnership, multi-state partnership, and with the industry. Can you tell us a little bit more why we're doing those trials and what type of information we're getting there to support our agriculture in the Southeast United States?
So I guess the purpose of the variety testing program in general is to be able to provide data to our stakeholders so they can make informed decisions about which varieties they want to plant. At Auburn, obviously, my program covers all the major row crops plus forages, but it's critical for these guys to be able to make an informed decision about what varieties to plant. And from what we're seeing in the data, variety makes a huge difference. It can mean an extra month of grazing on the front end. It can mean an extra month of grazing on the back end. It could be a significant difference in yield. There's a lot of factors to consider when we're looking at these varieties.
Fantastic. And yeah, we have how many trials, how many sites you have testing cool season forages in Alabama?
So in Alabama, I have 2 in the north region of Alabama, 3 in the central region, and then 2 more in the south.
So basically, the southern region of Alabama is what we use for basing our decisions for recommendations in North Florida. We also have one site in Citra, which is coordinated by the IFAS forage team here. And then we have all the sites in Georgia that is coordinated by the Georgia Variety Trial. Also, they have in different regions of Georgia. We get together once a year to talk about this data, compare notes, see what has been performing best, what varieties are breaking resistance or what disease is breaking resistance in those varieties, and what is recommended. And with Cheryl, we also have another trial here that is very applied. We want to talk a little bit about our efforts supported by the Milk Checkoff program.
Yeah, so Southeast Milk had been sponsoring for many years various PIs looking at aspects that help the dairy industry in particular. And we've been lucky enough to be funded year after year. Dr. Ann Blunt, who recently retired, has been one of the leaders in that in terms of these studies. And between her and Marcelo and myself, we've worked with several dairies. We used to work across the state from the deep south part of the state up to the north, but we've concentrated our efforts a little bit further north because the south tends to get rained out badly at the time of year we're trying to grow those winter forages. So we work with about 4 dairies or so, and also have additional materials that we share with extension agents. And as Marcelo well knows, he coordinates that, and that's a really nice program as well to help with the cattle producers, livestock producers. So we'll test mainly grass, small grains and annual ryegrass, and now and then, like the last year and this year coming up, we'll probably do a few of the legumes as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's a great way for us to learn what is working well and how those varieties are performing, and also a gateway for our breeding programs. For those that don't know, all of our universities here have a strong breeding program in many of the annual forages, winter annual forages, and those forages, those varieties that are released with the Auburn, with the UGA, or with the UF seal are developed here for use in our region and adapted to our conditions. That's why we promote. One big disclaimer here: this trial, those trials, those data that we present and what we're going to be talking here, it's supported by the industry. Those are varieties that are available in the market, but we're not endorsing any variety or company. We're talking about the data and observation. So make sure to look for our recommendations, see what's performing well, talk to your seed representatives and local seed companies to get the best varieties and the best yield. And always look for certified and tested seeds. That's going to make your pasture much better. So let's dive into some of our results. I think most of our beef cattle folks are always interested on ryegrass. What we have on the market this year, what has been performing, what are we recommending? Henry.
So I guess my disclaimer would be that at Auburn Variety Testing, we don't make recommendations. We just let the data speak for itself. So with that being said, we can discuss some of the results. And I've got a couple of unique things that I'd like to talk about this year. One thing new that we did, and this was done in our northernmost location close to Huntsville, but we looked at all of our small grain forages and ryegrass, and we looked to see what variety was going to start reproductive maturity first. And we recorded head dates, which was a good metric to measure this by. And within our ryegrass, we had 51 varieties. Within those 51 varieties, there was a 22-day difference between when the first one started reproduction to the last one started reproduction. So for people that are looking at overseeding a warm season pasture, which variety you select can definitely impact the green up of that warm season pasture. So that's one thing that we probably need to take into consideration when we're looking at these. Are we overseeding, or are we doing temporary winter grazing and we're not worried about the warm season?
Yeah, but even on the temporary winter grazing, what is our following crop, right? When do we need to get that crop planted? Very, very well. We have in our trial here in Citra, we saw some very good ryegrass production, some early ryegrass production. Of course, if we're talking about early biomass, there is no way to compare ryegrasses with some of the small grains. They're going to be far behind. They're going to be at best half as much production at some of the oats. But when we look into season long, those ryegrasses are really picking up. I think one of our best ryegrasses that are still producing well is early ploid. Is actually one of my favorite and probably one of the most used here for early productivity. Continues to be good. What I was excited to see, Henry, was there's 2 new lines that are from our variety development here that should be in the market in the near future, that are producing more than the top commercial variety. So very excited about those new materials.
So on your early season yields, you wouldn't think ryegrass compares?
Not on my data here.
Okay.
How is yours?
On mine, I would argue that ryegrass is highly compares, at least some varieties do. And I think we can still get way higher yields for the season total as well.
Well, the one thing is, when we're testing at dairies, they're harvesting at the end of February. And so it's super early compared to the livestock producers. So ryegrass has a hard time competing, although a couple of them come closer. But that's so when we talk about early versus late, we might want to actually give some dates, times to narrow it down.
I can clarify that from my perspective. When we're looking at these, I'm looking at early season is anything that we can get from the middle of March and sooner. So that's a cumulative total from the middle of March from whenever we can start harvesting.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah. So for just as a matter of magnitude here, I was looking into the 2-year data from our milk checkoff project, and actually we're getting to close to 5,000 pounds of dry matter per acre for ryegrasses, which is very good by the end of March. I mean, oat and rye, we can break the 7,000 pounds sometimes, or between 6,000 and 7,000 pounds. But considering that the ryegrass is right there, and if thinking about that ryegrass just being in the beginning of the season, if we're going to cut it, we could get another cut with probably just as much biomass later on. Of course, there is a big difference here when we talk about the nutritional level, the plane of nutrition from the dairy sides compared to what we see in most beef cattle productions, which is what we try to reproduce in our variety trials that are not on dairy land, that are not being irrigated with effluent. So big difference in amount of available nitrogen, especially there.
I would like to ask you, too, a question. Is frost-proof a commercially available variety now?
Frost-proof is.
Okay, and so this is very anecdotal. I probably should not share it, but when we were growing these varieties at Mariana, and it was in the spring, and it was extremely dry, all the ryegrass looked burned. And I think frost-proof is a diploid. It was the only ryegrass in a replication that did not just shrivel up and turn brown, where the other ones had. And so I find that very interesting, and I wouldn't bet my life on it or anything, but people keep an eye on that one and see if they're seeing any kind of difference in tolerance to super dry conditions, which we tend to have in late April, early May. So something to watch.
One of the things here that kind of puzzles a lot of people is common ryegrass, Gulf ryegrass. People, I just planted Gulf and it has been producing well for me. And when I start looking at my data, I was like, well, actually, it's not that bad. Of course, it's lower than everything else. It's lower. It's not the best, but not also lowest than everything else. But then I go and see the plots, and Gulf ryegrass is a diploid, and you see that tetraploid wide leaf. So what's going on in there with those common varieties?
So some of those varieties, obviously they're older varieties, and typically when these things are released, without getting into too much detail, there are patents on these varieties. And once they reach a certain age, the patent expires, and anybody that wants to can grow and produce Gulf ryegrass. So a lot of times what we see and what we joke about is, are you really getting true Gulf ryegrass? So I had an incident this year in central Alabama with Marshall, and I had the same thing happen. We bought some Marshall from a local retailer, and it was not what it was supposed to be when we planted it and it came up in the field. So I'm not saying that the older varieties aren't good. I would just be selective about where I purchased it and make sure that I was getting good quality seed.
Correct. So talking a little bit about oat, I think oat and ryegrass pretty much covers a lot of the acreage that is planted to cool season forages. Oat is one of the choices for the dairy folks in our region because of the early production. But also the beef cattle people are looking into that oat because they think the ryegrass is coming too late. Again, just a little caveat here, ryegrass many times comes late because it's lack of fertility, not only because it's late. It is later than oat, but it can be somewhat early if there is a right amount of nutrients there. But oat, we also saw some very interesting oats in the market coming up now, some new releases, and some disease breakdown here. For example, two of our previously previously resistant or tolerant oat, which had been Horizon 720 and Legend 567 that we recommended for early biomass production, and also for rust resistance, have been showing more and more crown rust over the past couple of years. And this is not because they are bad. It's a natural process of breakdown of disease tolerance. So if anybody's planting those, they're still under our recommendation. They're still in the recommended list, but we need to keep an eye on those because there is a tendency for more incidence of rust on those. What happens when we get rust is going to reduce the productivity, is going to affect quality, it's going to reduce the overall length of the growing season too. So in a grazing situation, the best scenario would be just graze off that diseased material to try to remove some of that inoculant and fertilize, try to go and get another growth. Sometimes in a dairy situation where there is more value to that silage and it's going to be only one cut, there is a possibility of some fungicide management. We need to run the numbers and see if it's worth, if it's early in the season, or just go ahead and get that crop cut either for silage or for hay to eliminate that inoculant. Any interesting comments on the oats there from Alabama?
I will say just on harvest timing. So if we're looking at the season, your warm season, whatever you're grazing it's gone, and you've got a gap before you get to your winter grazing. You've planted it, you've got to let it get established before you want to put some cattle on it and start grazing. So what's the best way to shorten that gap would be the question that I would be asking if I was a grower. And I've got a cool curve that everybody shows as far as when do each of the forage species peak at their peak growth time across the season. And I like the curve. It's great, but I've tried to put a number to that. So I started looking back at some of my old data and just seeing, hey, when can we make our first harvest on whichever of the 5 species we're evaluating? And what I looked at on a 3-year average, if we just let ryegrass be our baseline, we were able to get a wheat harvest on average 11 days sooner. We were able to get triticale 13 days sooner, oats 14 days sooner, and cereal rye 19 days sooner. So if you're looking at those species and you're trying to close that gap at the first of the season, I would argue that rye and oats could help you close that gap much faster than your ryegrass.
I would like to add the rye especially has a wide range in maturity dates.
Yes.
So you can do a 401 or the new release 405, and those are super early. And then Wren's tends to be for us a later variety.
And within each of those species, variety selection is going to matter. I'm not going to go over the numbers, but if we're looking at that 0 to 14 to 19 days sooner, you could not be any better off than if you choose the wrong variety. So variety will make a big difference.
It is. And I would probably argue that rye, from what I've seen, I think rye is the one that has the biggest difference in terms of maturity for varieties, because you have 401, Florida 401, which is a pretty old variety, and 405 that's coming up. I don't think 405 is released yet, or is available. It's been released but not available yet. It's coming from Mixon.
The seed that is available has already been spoken for.
Oh, okay. So there was some available, and it's already gone. But those are super, super early. And then you have Kelly Grazer 3, you have Renza Brosi, and even some of the older Bates and Auburn. They are going to be like ryegrasses way, way late. Should have mentioned again about the oats. It's important. I mentioned 2 of the varieties that have previously been resistant to crown rust, and now we're showing symptom of disease. Unfortunately, there's no variety in the market nowadays that we can say this is completely resistant. There will be some level of resistance, but most of them are going to show symptoms showing some rust. depending on the incidence, depending on the race of the rust that's out there this year, this is going to show more or less. It seems that we're looking into a La Nina year, right, Sherry? We're talking about that.
Yes, correct.
That means drier than normal and warmer than normal winter for us, right?
Drier and tends to be a little warmer, but I also notice, and they report this sometimes, La Nina years tend when we get that super cold snap too sometimes, because everything tends to be a little mild, and then it hits you the end of January or mid-February when you think you're done. So,
yeah, and that's what we're trying to get. For example, we have some oats that are much more resistant to cold weather. They are more prostrate types. They're later types like Horizon 306. And we saw that a couple of years ago with that very cold snap that we had between Christmas and New Year 2 seasons ago. And few of the oats resisted to that cold weather. We had a lot of oat kill. And I think that's where there's a good spot for triticale, because we have the quality, a little bit better quality in general than rye. And we have the resistance, the disease resistance, and also the cold tolerance. So a mixture of triticale and oat and ryegrass or something like that, I'm very fond of.
Yeah, and just as a reminder to those out there, triticale is a cross between, or a hybrid between rye and wheat. So it has some of the wheat quality and the strength of the rye. So it's a really good crop to have. And we still haven't discovered exactly why this is, but you know how rye is. Once it forms heads and all, you have a lot of heads lasting the rest of the season. You have triticale with heads, it doesn't matter what stage, they'll graze that whole thing down. We don't know what the key, we've studied amino acids and sugars and everything, but there's something a little more palatable for whatever reason about triticale than say rye.
Yeah, from what I learned from the industry, and you mentioned that the 405 rye is already gone from the market. I know some of the trichols that are the newer trichols have already been pretty much sold. There is very short supply, but the traditional 342 is still in the market. It's fading out of the market, but it's still in the market, still a great variety. And one of my favorites, actually, 1143, which is early, and a good choice for wildlife. I love to see those seed heads, those huntless seed heads.
One thing you mentioned on the oats and the cold tolerance, and I would take this opportunity to remind everybody that it's always a good thing to spread your risk and diversify. So you can do that with species. So you may not want to plant all oats or all ryegrass, but you also may not want to plant all the same variety. So just don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Let's visit a little bit about that concept. I used to think I like thinking about species mixture in terms of complementarity. They need to complement each other in terms of time of production during the season, of space, on how they characterize, they grow, growth habits, of time and space, of function. So we have legumes, we have brassicas, we have grasses, and now in terms of resistance. And this one is the fourth one, is a criteria that I added to my list later on, because I thought, okay, you don't put two small grains together because they are going to fill the same niche. Well, until you get the first big frost. And we saw that if you only had oat and you got killing frosts, well, we're pretty much out of luck. But if you have a triticale there, it's going to sustain that production. What is your criteria, both Henry and Cheryl? What's your criteria when you think about mixtures? What are you looking for?
Go ahead, Henry.
I would be looking at this. At first, I would look at the species. When is that peak production going to be? So we don't want two things that are going to peak out at the same time. We want them to complement each other. And I would do the same thing when I looked at varieties. So if I would look at planting either as a mixture, that's kind of a rabbit hole we could go down if we need to, or either planting one pasture in an early season and one in a late. I would look at spreading that out so you can extend your growing season versus putting two things in that are going to be really similar.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And again, another anecdotal, but we would find when we had mixtures of small grains or mixed with ryegrass, when we've had some cold snaps, the monocultures, those that are grown by themselves, would have more frost damage than if they were mixed together. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because you'd say, okay, well, if this variety is a little more tolerant, then that's the reason. But no, it's something about the mixing. Maybe it's difference in heights and I don't know, the architecture that just seems to benefit them to some extent. We've seen that a few years in a row in our trials.
How do you guys feel about many variety mix, 10-way mix, 15-way mix?
Depends how much money you have.
So a lot of people argue like, well, at least something is going to grow, they tell me. And I say, well, and everything else you're just wasting money on, right? So being intentional about what we're growing, not just putting mix together just because. Yeah. Being intentional and choosing those forages that are going to be actually grow well in each situation is the important part.
And I think, Marcelo, you've helped some folks who demand a lot of mixes, and the key was always, are you growing the varieties regardless of what you're growing? Is it the variety that grows developed for this region? I think that's the ultimate important. Yep. And if you make your own mixes, remember, if you're planting 100 pounds of a small grain, if you're planting two types, now it's 50 pounds of each, and make sure you make those adjustments as you go along.
Very, very important. So let's get into planting season, or planting, the actual planting now. Pure and viable seeds. Normally, we need to look into that label to see how much, what's the germination of those seeds, how much weed seeds and contaminants we have, and also for legumes, how much coating. Many times they're coated, and frequently half of the weight of the seeds, half of the weight that's in the bag is actually coating and not seeds. So adjusting our seeding rate to the weight that based on germination and based on pure seed is very important. Cheryl and I have another trial that I'm very excited about. Still early to tell a lot. Probably need to do some follow up, but we've been looking into pre-inoculated seeds and the viability of those. Still in the data analysis phase, but looks like it pays off to get those seeds re-inoculated, right?
I think it shows a little bit of that. And I think when it becomes, again, we're getting the legumes inoculated because we need those nitrogen-fixing bacteria and the clay coatings that they use, and maybe they're using other materials now. It probably all comes out of the company fine, but you got a long period between the time it comes from the company to the place that's carrying the seed and to the final buyer, and what you're doing when you're storing your seed before you plant it. Whether that is the coating or you're buying the peat mix that you add yourself, they'll have expiration dates on them. You got to pay attention to that. And also, that doesn't guarantee that they were kept refrigerated under dry conditions up to the point you got them. And then what did you do after you bought your materials and your seed? How did you keep those so they weren't getting basically cooked?
Yeah, so our recommendation is always that it's safe to say just go ahead and get some inoculant. Make sure it's specific for what you're planting. Get some inoculant, re-inoculate it, even if it's coated, because that $6 packet per bag of seed is going to help ensuring that you have that bacteria ready for the plant and improve your nodulation and nitrogen fixation on that legume.
Yeah, $6 versus $250 per bag or so of some.
Yeah, plus the cost of failing, which is frequently very, very high, right? Because you end up having no forage. Last thing I want to explore here before we wrap up, and this is always one of the top questions: how do I fertilize my cool season pastures? And the traditional response, it depends, comes in. So let's just explore a few scenarios that I think are the most common in our region. Basically, we have two major ways to get those cool season forages established. We're going to come into Bermuda grass or Bahia grass, planting on sod, overseeded, or we're going to go into prepared seed bed. Cheryl, let's talk a little bit about the things we need to consider when we are planting on top of sod.
Well, hopefully your sod, whether it's Bahia grass or Bermuda, whatever, hopefully it's dormant or near dormancy, because if the perennial system's still active, it's going to have a hard time, those little seedlings, fighting for water and nutrients. So that's key, and light. So Argentine Bahia is one of the better Bahia grass varieties to overseed with. You can do the others, but they're the best. And then once that's in place, then hopefully you've had a soil test done in the past several months, so you have some feeling. But if your grass and your sod has been doing well, then you probably just need some nitrogen. And our official IFAS recommendations has some splits supplied, but I think those of us have worked with a lot of producers and have seen a lot of on-farm work. I think for grazing pastures, we talk about 50 pounds at or near planting to get things going.
We have our general recommendation of about 30 pounds of nitrogen to get that forage started, that after planting. We consider probably around 50 to 60 pounds if we are in a sod situation, because it's going to, some of that nitrogen is going to be mobilized either on organic matter breakdown or on the thatch breakdown, or picked up by the warm season grass that might be still active, right?
Well, even if you're in a tilled situation in Florida, the annuals grow really fast. And when they need that nitrogen, they need it pretty early. And by the time someone plants, by the time they get out and to put some more nitrogen out, you've already probably wasted a couple of weeks of growth, and it's hard to catch back up with its short life cycle. So I think we've been erring a little more and trying to get a little more nitrogen on the early end than having a 30 pound and then coming back with another 50 pounds or so later. So if you're going to if you're not sure, put a little more in the beginning, unless you're expecting a lot of rain, and then see how things look. Your eye is pretty well calibrated at seeing green. If you can see the color green, you probably know if it's needing nitrogen or not. It's pretty clear to you.
Yep. And then we're going to come with probably a split application if we're grazing, or if we're going to be haying, it can be a single application. Try to get those forages really, really going fast. I'm looking for 60 to 80 pounds. I think our official recommendation is 80 pounds, and then 80 pounds after each cut or after each grazing event. Yeah, one thing to remember is our soils are extremely poor, and we're working with fast-growing things. If the nutrients are not there, they're just not going to perform. And that's one of the complaints that we have from most farmers. Well, they really don't perform well, but are you willing to put what it takes to get those forages growing? I think the situation is kind of different in Alabama, because you guys indeed have some soil there. It's not just playground sand.
It depends on where you're at in Alabama. One thing I will say that probably most of my Alabama growers are jealous of is the fact that y'all have such a different growing season, because you're so far south, you can start grazing much faster. So one thing I've noticed is my South Alabama locations, if we're looking at ryegrass in general, we could typically have a good grazing event after, let's say, 80, 83 days, somewhere in there. Whereas my North Alabama location, we're looking at 130 days. So,
yeah, I think photo period has a big role in that. So if we can get our ryegrass in by late October, we can probably graze before Christmas a little bit. But if you wait and you're not planting till end of November, early December, then it really takes that delay, because December, January, the days are so short, and you guys are shorter even still in central North Alabama. I think it plays a big role for ryegrass especially.
Yeah. So it's very hard to generalize all those recommendations. So the best thing for you to do is always talk to your local extension agent, come up with a fertilization plan. And of course, everything in the paper is great. We have all those plans until you get to the field, until you're dependent on weather, until you're dependent on the fertilizer person to come and all that. So flexibility and planning are quite important in any situation. Well, fantastic. There's a lot of information here. Henry, if we want to take a look at the Auburn cool season variety trial data, how can we find it?
So you can find all that on the Auburn Variety Testing website. That is aaes.auburn.edu/variety-test. You can Google it and find it pretty easy. Everything's broken out by crop. So if you want to go to ryegrass or small grain forages, check those out. I've got links to most of the summary tables. So you can go check those out, see what you think. There's multi-year data, single-year data, multi-location data. All of it's there right for the picking.
Well, same for us, the data from the Florida trial. And I say in the singular because, well, actually we have the dairy side, so it's indeed trial. We have much less locations though. It's available on our IFAS Forage team webpage. The easiest way to do it is look for IFAS Forage team in your search engine, then trying to repeat this very long address string here. But to make it easier, we're going to put the links in the description of this podcast. So if you just want to take a look at the description, click there. You'll find the data for the University of Florida, for Auburn University, and also for the University of Georgia variety trials. Again, we all work together to bring to you the most updated and relevant information on the performance of those annual crops. Anything else to add?
I would like to just reiterate about the varieties. Really talk to your extension agents or your specialists in the area to get the best varieties, because if you have the wrong variety, nothing else that we say matters.
One thing I'd like to touch on that we didn't talk about is, at least for the Auburn trials, I ended up with 51 varieties of ryegrass. So if you go to your local retailer, I can just about bet you they will not have all 51 varieties of ryegrass available. So just because your retailer only has a few available, that does not limit you to those few. If you find something you like in the data, contact the company that produces that seed, see if they've got a retailer that they can get you some seed from. If not, a lot of the times they can ship directly to you. So just because your retailer doesn't have what you want doesn't mean you're limited to that.
And do it now, because we're running short on time. If you're trying to order something special, time is running short.
You bet. Well, Henry and Cheryl, thanks for participating this episode of Cow Talks. Again, welcome again this year, right? And we hope to visit with you again next year with more updates, annual updates on the cool season forage variety recommendations. For those that are interested in more details, again, follow us on our social media, look on our website, and keep an eye for the opportunities for visiting with us directly during our field days. We have many field days in Alabama and in Florida that are going to be scheduled for sometime this winter and spring.
I thought you were promised me a talking cow. Where's the cow that talks?
We'll have a talking cow during one of our field days, if you want to say. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on this Cow Talks podcast. We hope you have enjoyed this conversation.
If you have any questions, ideas, follow-ups, or comments, please reach out to us through our email, forages@ifas.ufl.edu. That is forages@ifas.ufl.edu. ifas.ufl.edu, or find us on our social media, uf.forages on Instagram, UF Forage Team on Facebook, or UF IFAS Forages on YouTube.